Good afternoon, friends. Bill here, Sportsman Outreach. Hope you're having a good week. We're having a good one here. We already had today. I'm excited about this. We've had working on the Grey Cup in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, November 16 and 19, and had two really amazing conversations today with a pastor there and another evangelist, and yesterday with another gentleman. So three good conversations, Lord willing, three guys that, Lord willing, by God's grace, will come and join us and at the Grey Cup. That's exciting to hear and meet other like-minded people. Two of them are already open air preaching, and including the pastor. And the other gentleman is just working with another ministry up there to become a full-time evangelist. So Lord's working, friends. Be encouraged. The Lord is working here, and we're excited about that. And so today I'm excited to bring on Jim Shaw as one of our Super Bowl outreach team leaders this year. Jim, we'll get to his story, but Jim is a friend of Al Baker's, and he first came to the Super Bowl in Houston. I think that was 2017, and we had a good time there. And then we stayed in touch off and on. He's a pastor, Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Brunswick, Georgia. And so let's bring Jim on and get to know him a little bit. Jim, how you doing, sir?
Hey, Bill, it's good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. How's Brunswick today?
It is markedly cooler than it has been. It's the temperature and the humidity's dropped a little bit, and it's actually okay to go outside.
It gets hot down there, doesn't it? Like muggy hot?
Yeah, it really does. The heat index is what really gets you.
Well, that's cool. Well, cool. Well, let's start with here. Tell us a little bit about your Christian testimony. We're going to go way back to the beginning and just talk about becoming a Christian, and we'll start right there. So share that with us if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. I count my conversion to be when I was around, I don't remember exactly how, probably around 9, 10, somewhere in that area. I had a particularly bad day of deviling my younger siblings. And my mother talked to me that evening about why I did what I did and what the penalty for my sin was. And I did not desire to have that penalty, and I knew she convicted me of my sin. And she pointed me to Christ for forgiveness. And I will say, though, that I didn't have maybe as good of discipleship going forward. But nonetheless, still, the Lord always was there, keeping His hand upon me, stopping me from doing things and going certain places and so forth. And He held me until I was about 24 or so in college, and that's when I remember specifically Him gripping me as I was sitting in the chair, saying, "I've been very patient with you," and I agreed with Him, and that was where a real change came, a real repentance, and kind of an extra understanding of who God is and who I am, and what He. I also experienced His love and a sense that I didn't want to do the things that I'd been doing. I kind of came to a better understanding of who God was, and from there it was a turning away from a lot of not just sin, but just ignorance in some ways, and turning to God. And I just I've walked and grown from there till now, and I'll stop there and let you continue.
That's good. Just out of curiosity, like with your mom, I mean, that's a pretty profound thing for mom to sit down with you. Had she had these conversations with you before? Was this the first time? Were you surprised that she brought this up to you?
I'd grown up in church. I certainly was familiar with a lot of the stories and so forth, but I don't think she'd ever brought up this stuff with me before, and certainly not in this way.
Were you struck by that, or did it just kind of flow in what was happening? What did it seem natural in the particular situation?
I think she pointed out the things that I had done, and she pointed out that those things were sinful, and that they put me under the wrath of God. And
wow.
I knew that I was under the wrath of God for the things that I had done. And I didn't want to be there anymore.
Wow. That's one of the best stories I've heard. I mean, that's pretty profound that the timing of it all, your response and your mother stepping out. I mean, instead of just yelling at you, stop doing that or I'm gonna, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She pointed you out, man. That's pretty good. That's a good parenting tip. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, like of course, like in your just since you're a pastor and so forth, you might understand the point of this question. So you're going from you're a 9 to 24. Did you continue to go to church? Were you reading your Bible? Were you just cruising along with the culture? What sort of led to this? And it's not atypical, obviously. You've talked to a lot of people, Jim. What led just to the kind of cruising along that you had? Or
Yeah. Kind of grew up in a church where we were anything but fundamentalist, and
yeah,
I think we were a respectable church. I think you probably know what I mean by that.
yeah,
And there wasn't, I don't know if it, I'm guessing that probably people who grew up in other churches back in the 80s, probably had people who came into their lives and invested in them and discipled them and so forth. I didn't know of that happening. Everything just seemed to be church as usual for me, but there were no Bible studies for young men. There were no men's groups where we went and studied, at least not that I know of. So, discipleship was not real good. And I think that in many ways led to during my high school years, and I hear a lot of testimonies because I go to Presbyterian meetings and new pastors come in. I keep hearing the same testimony over and over again. During high school, part of college, I drifted away and didn't live for Christ, and I definitely was in that same boat. And that's what that's but the Lord was always holding me. I can look back on different times when I thought about going this way because I was this was the way that the world seemed to work. People seemed to do things, and God just said, no, you're not going there. You can't do that. You can't do that. So He kept holding me in place for a reason. And then when I was 24, 25, however old I was, that's when He, put the thumb down on me of sorts and said, hey, I've called you for more than this. I've been very patient with you. And it was just another convicting moment where I thought back on
yeah,
things that I had done and the stupidity and the foolishness and all of the ways that the penalty of sin is death. I've told you that. And all of my sin, there was a death element to them, but there could have been a worse death element to them. God could have given me more of a full brunt of the penalty for the things that I had done. But He had graciously withheld a lot of those things from me. And when he came to me and he kind of put his finger in my chest a little bit, a lot of those things started flashing back, and I started, ooh, man, you are absolutely right. I've been a fool in many ways. I've been disobedient, and I was sorry, and I repented of those things. So it was sort of a sanctification moment that came many years after the original justification moment. Because, when I was 8 or 9 years old and through much of my younger teen years, there were things that held me back from being like a lot of the other kids in many ways. And that's why I would count that as a valid time of conversion, just because of the way that I saw God kind of holding on to me during all of those years. And then the at 24 kind of being a wake up moment when God sort of calls me to His purposes in a way, preparing me for ministry and so forth.
do you think, looking back on it now, that those times 9 to 24 where you use them as you counsel, disciple other people? Like how does, in other words, you've had this experience of how God works. You can return back to them and say, here's how God works, and the experience gives you that understanding.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a sense of understanding for young people, especially.
Yeah,
I've got
yeah,
kids who are between 18 and 24 years old, and the 24, the 22-year-old kind of moving out of some of that stuff. But when you're 18 years old, we see it a lot. There are a lot of things happening in their lives. They're trying to figure out who they are, what their purpose is. It's a natural process for human beings between the age of about 11 to onward, and especially 11 to 21, 22, somewhere in there, that you're pulling away from your parents. It's a natural thing that you've got to grow up and become your own adult. And so they start working to pull themselves away from the parents, but they want to hold on close to them because they need their parents. So it's a little bit of a push-pull and dualistic kind of thing in a way. But when they're between 18 and 21 or 22 years old, it's a real difficult time when kids are very confused. And even if they've been brought up in the church and brought up well, there's still a lot of stuff's coming at them pretty fast, pretty hard. And I learned to take some mercy and to understand and to know that the likelihood is they're going to come back. Things are going to begin to make sense. You continue to work with them during those times and flesh out the theology that you've been teaching them. Now it's a kind of a practical theology time because they're going through a lot of stuff you've been telling them about, and now you're kind of coaching them and walking them through those things. So you don't just get angry with them, say, oh, you must be a reprobate. You've done this, and then turn your back on them. No, you have patience with them, and you work with them, and you understand that they're being progressively sanctified, just as we're being progressively sanctified. So some of those things, I can look back on them and use those in how I counsel people.
That's good. That's really helpful. That's interesting. That's good. Okay, so you're 24 years old. You're out of college. What happens next in your life on your journey? I guess we might say to your calling or to the next stage.
Sure. So I met my wife, Brooke, in almost my last semester of college. We dated the last semester of college. She was already out of school, living somewhere else. We dated, and then in July I proposed to her. I mean, I knew everybody in my family knew that she was the one. So I proposed to her. I moved to Maryland and got a couple of jobs up there, and we were getting ready for a wedding, got married, and we lived there for a while. And I was working for an intellectual property research group in D.C., and I was trained down from Maryland to D.C. every day. And one day it just really struck me. I felt perhaps I was called to the ministry, that I had the giftings and the calling. And let me warn young men here. This is a warning I give to young men. Do not presume upon the Lord that you are called to ministry just because you really love the Lord, because you want to serve Him. I've seen a lot of men make the mistake because they're deeply devoted Christians. They love Christ and they want to serve Him. That must mean that they have to go into the ministry. But you have to be called into the ministry. If you're not called, it doesn't matter, how much you love the Lord and such. God, you're probably not going to bless that because that's not where He's called you to be. So I've warned young men not to make that mistake. If you are good with money, you may be an investment advisor. Christ needs people who are investment advisors, who are dentists, who are doctors, who are astrophysicists, who drive trucks, who do all sorts of things. So I encourage young men to be careful before they just decide, without good prayer and testimony from other people around them, they just decide on their own they must be called. That's a bad thing. If you make a mistake, God doesn't really bless. He may carry us through a little bit, but He doesn't really bless things that He hasn't called somebody to. But I began to feel that calling, and I saw that I knew I had some gifts in that way. I could speak and study and so forth. And I went and talked to a pastor at a church in which we were attending about it. He said, "Well, take some seminary classes and see if you like it and what you think." And about that time, 9/11 happened. We kind of moved back out of that area, back down south. I thought we were going to end up in Atlanta, and I was going to look at going to RTS Atlanta. But my wife was in Birmingham, where my family's from, and her parents were living there also. And talked to a guy. He says, "Hey, I've got a law firm. You can come work as a paralegal here. And then Beeson has a divinity school, and you can go there, and I thought, okay, well, this sounds like where I need to be. I started Beeson Divinity, which is at Samford University there in Birmingham, and I started in their Master of Theology. The idea I thought was I was going to study theology, and I really had a thing for political theory. I loved political theory. I read all of this, and I was thinking, I could teach at a college, teach political theory, and also influence young people with a Christian worldview and mindset. As about the first semester or two that I was in school there, I began to realize that there's no Christian theory, no political theory that's going to solve the world's problems. We have a sin problem, and we need Christ to solve our problems. And I began, and I just more and more realized that I was called towards ministry. And I switched over to the Master of Theology, the Master of Divinity. And then, for financial reasons and such, I switched over to Birmingham Theological Seminary, which meets there at Briarwood. Very happy with that decision. It was an excellent school, excellent purpose that they're there. They're there to serve men who are working full time, men who are pastors, or men who are wanting to be pastors. Serve a lot of the underprivileged community, a lot of the black men also in the Birmingham area. That's their purpose, is to be there for those guys, to provide them with a good, sound seminary education, while also not breaking the bank. I mean, you go in the evenings and it's $100, $200 a course or something like that. So and I trained under guys who were in the pastorate, and I was very, very pleased with it. I was there for 10 years. I'll tell you that much. It takes a while. You're taking 102 hours at 2 hours a course. So that's 50 classes with papers. Seminary, they're master's level classes. But it took me 10 years. But that's the way I knew that I was called. I pushed through that thing for 10 years. Ended up at a small church in Weogufka, Alabama, out in Coosa County, and then wound up here in Brunswick about 7 years ago. And I hope that answers your question.
That's a good one. Let's. You said okay. Good point about the calling. What happened for you to perceive that you were called?
It was a sense. It's there's two. Well, the way the Presbyterian Church works when you're called, somebody explained it as 3 bullets. You have the internal calling, a sense that you're called. You have the calling of the presbytery, senses that you're called, and the church in which you are going to serve, senses that you're called. And so I sensed that I knew that I could communicate with people. I knew that I liked to communicate with people. I'm an introvert, but you put me on a stage and I can do a pretty good job of communicating with people. Logical mind, can study, can understand, get to the point of things, and then express it. And there was nothing else that I saw that I wanted to do like that. I mean, I think Spurgeon said, if you can do anything else but preach, do it. And I knew that there was nothing else that I had to do this. It was my calling. And so during that time, I was going to Presbyterian meetings. They were watching me, got licensed by them. And then I was doing pulpit supply at the little church in Weogufka. And so as somebody explains it, all 3 of those bullets came and met. And, when all 3 of those bullets meet, you have a calling. And they did in my case. So I sensed the gifting and the overwhelming desire, and then it was externally validated by 2 other sources.
So, like, in a sense, I guess the word I use is physiologically, like within your person, you're riding the train down, you have this sense of calling. It immediately, like divine things happen. I'm not talking about hearing, the voice of God per se, but all of a sudden your attention is directed to ministry when you weren't really thinking about it before. Was it something like that? And then when you began to contemplate it, you began to think it through, and that's kind of how the calling began to work itself out, manifest itself in your thinking, you might say.
Yeah, after I had my experience when I was 24, I began to get much more of a yearning just to serve, and
Gotcha.
a love for the Word, a love for God, and I think there was something stirring. And I can't remember the exact. I remember sitting on the train. I remember looking out the window, and I remember it coming. And I remember this. I guess to a degree there was a peace. You know, this is where you need to be. This is what you're called to do. You would spend your time in prayer. You would spend your time, in study, devoted to those things and preparing to lead others, to teach others. And that was what I knew I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a salesperson. I didn't want to be a money manager. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to do any of those things. This is what I wanted to do. And so there was a degree of peace that came upon me then. And from there, I really began to change towards, looking towards doing that, looking in that direction.
Yes. So the 10-year process there, did you met, it sounds like that was good for you. You wanted a protracted time to examine, evaluate. You weren't in a hurry. Describe that.
I don't know that I exactly wanted a protracted time. It was a protracted time. Actually, I cringed to think about it, but I wrote the president of the seminary a 6-page paper about what he could cut out of the program to get us out of there fast. We took classes and everything about including practically how to change a sink in the church. I mean, it was a very comprehensive program, but I did need it. I can tell you that if I had gotten it earlier, I could have done harm to a church. I wasn't ready in many ways. I could tell you that story another time, but in many ways, I wasn't ready. And God had a plan, and I was there for that amount of time in God's will and in His plan, and it was good. It was good. That's all I can say.
Cool. That's really good. Well, just as a digresses for a second, so I know Dr. Reeder a little bit. He's spoken at REF things. I mean, obviously being there at Briarwood with Dr. Reeder and I guess Frank Barker, those guys, we'll talk more about him, but that is a unique opportunity in of itself to be around. So did you have a sense that you were amongst them and watching how they operated too? So like kind of a practicum in a sense?
Yeah, we took our course in evangelism with Dr. Barker, and you met him, and he was an emeritus pastor, and but you could go by his office anytime. He had an office there, a little small, hidden away in Briarwood, where he would go, and you could go pray with him. You could ask him for advice and so forth. And he was always very open and willing to meet with people. And then Dr. Reeder, he taught a class. I cannot remember the name of the class, but it was sort of, we met at the Panera Bread, once, I think it was one day a week, may have been two. And there we had coffee, and he taught us, and it was sort of a leadership, it was going to be a leadership type of class. And it was good to hear from him and get his insight. It is so valuable to hear from older folks or people who've walked the trail before you. I mean, right now, up in Savannah, Terry Johnson has a monthly Thursday luncheon where he sits down with us pastors and just sort of shares with us things that he's learned from his many years as a pastor, and it's very valuable. So it was good to sit down with Dr. Reeder, and I remember the one thing in particular he told us. He says, just because you have an idea, don't go write a book about it. That there's a lot of people who cause a lot of trouble by getting an idea, not really vetting it real well, and go writing a book, and they put it out there, and people start, getting led astray by that book. And that kind of stuck with me. Not that anybody's going to want to read what I have to say.
You definitely sound like, you certainly have a appreciation, a respect, you might say, Jim, for the institutional structures and support system, you might say, the seminary, the church, and these things. Was that always there for you, or did you have to reckon with that at all?
I don't think I did. I've always had a respect for the church and for all things surrounding the church.
Cool. All right, so you get your pastorate. What's the name of the city? Watanga?
Weogufka, W-E,
Weodufka. Okay.
W-E-O-G-U-F-K-A. It means muddy water. It's, I
Okay.
think, Creek Indian for muddy water. It's in Coosa County. It was a lovely little place.
All right, man. So you're there. You there? What, 3 years?
I think I was there closer to 6. I mean, closer to
6. Okay.
5 when you put in. I started as their pulpit supply about 6 months before I graduated, and then served with them another 5.5 or so, 4.5, 5.5 years. I don't remember exactly, but I was there a good while.
All right, so you're there. You step in. You 10 years of school and so forth. What are, like, on both sides, what you learned and what you didn't expect? What are one or two things that you found? Hey, I love this about being here and preaching and teaching, and then you got there and also and said, I really don't like this, or I didn't know this was coming.
Uh, well, I love the church and I love God's people. And when I went there, I was with wonderful people, people who were humble, godly people who loved their church and they loved the Lord. They loved their pastor. It was wonderful. The bad thing was I probably buried a quarter of the church. It was an older group of people, and that was heartbreaking. That hurts. If people ever think, when your pastor comes to you and visits you in the hospital or visits you when you've lost a loved one, and he says, my condolences are with you. I'm so sorry to hear about this. Believe him, because he goes home and he cries. He goes home and he weeps over you and in your pain. When he hears about you losing your loved one, he's heartbroken. So believe your pastor when he consoles you in that way. Uh, but I watched a lot of people die there, and that was painful. Um, the one thing that kind of shocks you when you're an intern, you preach once every 3 months or so, and you work 40, 50 hours or more, work out this perfect sermon, and you deliver it, and then you take all the pats on the back and all that kind of stuff, and then 3 months later you've worked and you've written another one. But once you get into full-time ministry, Sunday comes every week, and it seems to be on a rush. It's you're having to really draw on a wellspring of knowledge in many ways. That's why it's so good to have a seminary education. I think that the Presbyterian system, and there are others I'm sure that are like it, but I know that within the PCA, you've got to know your theology. When you go, you get examined by the Presbyterian, you got to know your stuff. They don't want you having to go sit down in your study during the week and go, okay, now am I a sinner because I sin, or do I sin because I'm a sinner? You need to, I sin because I'm a sinner. And that pours out into how you preach and teach your people. So that's, you really learn to draw on a lot of that kind of stuff. The one thing about being a smaller church pastor and a solo pastor is it can be hard sometimes to get a break. And really, that probably wasn't the fault of the church. That was more my fault. I'm kind of the person you work. You don't take breaks. Everybody else is working, you're working too. And I certainly would counsel, younger guys, especially if you're in a solo pastoral type position, don't preach 52 weeks out of the year. Get you some time off in order to refresh yourself and keep yourself, from, because burnout can happen. And I've had times where I've gone through a little bit of it too. And I've learned to get more vacations and stuff to help me to move through with it. But, it's important for pastors to be taking some time, even if you're in a smaller church and it costs them a couple of $100s to hire, somebody to come in and preach for you. Take that time that you get, for yourself.
That's a good word. Also, in burying people, like, what did you? Obviously, the scriptures come alive that people really do die in a sense. But what else did you learn in that, either about your view, your faith, or people, or something like that really changed how you looked at your pastorate?
That's a good question, and you notice that everybody wants at least where we were, they wanted a Christian burial. And they would, people who hadn't been in the church for quite a while, would come to me, and I would bury somebody that I bury a distant family member who hadn't been around a while, but they wanted a Christian burial. It's a good time to preach the gospel. You got a captive audience, and you should. Don't get into, don't be lazy and just give a general eulogy or something, but let these people know what's up. Some people, this is the only time they come into a church, and yeah, they may not come up to you afterwards and say, I need to commit my life to Christ today. What must I do to be saved? But oftentimes, salvation and coming to belief is a cumulative thing. People hear a word, now a word here and a word there, and season and out of season, and they, it begins to have an effect on them. So never miss that opportunity, whether it's a graveside or a full-on funeral, to preach the penalty of sin and the good news of Jesus Christ.
That's good. That's good. Does it make, if you're around more people who are dying, does it make the end more clear? When you're young, you live forever, but you see a lot of people dying, hey, listen, dying, everybody's going to the grave. Does that make it more real for you? Does that change your outlook?
I don't know that it did, but it sure did hurt. You hear about everybody's death, you hear about everybody's pain, the things. Not only they're dying, but when they're in the hospital, when their loved ones in the hospital, people call on you. You are their strength, and as a person who is a compassionate individual, that weighs on you, it begins to hurt. But I don't want anybody to be discouraged from calling their pastor. We are there for this reason, and I would be mad if you didn't. Okay, I need to be, but it does. You're shouldering a little bit, but I was in my 40s, and it didn't really weigh on me that much. And I did see some younger people die, some people who had been ill and that kind of stuff. But at that time, it didn't really. I don't know that it changed my perspective. I knew I was going to die eventually, and that there was two alternatives as to what happens to you when you die.
Okay. All right. So you're there for 6 years. You move off to Brunswick. Why'd you make the move? How's it been there? Is it an extension of pastoring, or has it been a different experience for you?
I came here. It was just an opportunity to grow as a pastor a little bit. I was bivocational when I was at Unity and Weoguff. I worked for the Apologetics Resource Center also, and I was having to fundraise for that particular position at the Apologetics Resource Center, and I'm pretty much the world's worst fundraiser. So it's good to be able to come somewhere where I could devote more of my time in full to pastoring. So that was very helpful, and gave me an opportunity, a little bigger. I had pretty much talked to everybody in that little town of 200. I've been door to door and talked to just about everybody there, shared the gospel with most people, invited them to church, et cetera, et cetera. And I was ready to see some new faces and have new opportunities. And so that's how it kind of came. It was actually, this church was planted while Al Baker was at Golden Isles Presbyterian here over on St. Simon's Island. So we're daughter church of one of Al Baker's churches.
Gotcha. And has it been what you wanted? Has it been the full time? Has it been different, or just more of the same?
It's been great. It's been a full time job. It's got its own challenges in that it's a hard ground in some ways. This is a retirement community, and it's a very low income community. Both things. And so when you go we're located more in a low income community, and they're not exactly as open to reform type thought, to Presbyterian thought, and to the whites. To be honest with you, I mean there are some barriers between the races right now when it comes down to those things. We do continue to reach out in the community, continue to looking to ramp that up even more we know that the Holy Spirit has power to change people's lives and hearts, and it's not necessarily whether they come here or where they go, but we want to see people's hearts change and people come to Christ. And so we're praying very much that the Holy Spirit would pour out on this community. And I don't know, last week in our Wednesday or Tuesday night men's study, we were looking at Acts, and it's when Paul and Barnabas first go into Asia Minor. And they go to a church, and the elders there read from the law and the prophets, and they ask Paul to expound on it. And he begins to lay out, much like Peter did at Pentecost and Stephen did before the stoning, lay out all the history of Israel, and then he lays out Jesus Christ in front of the people, and he says, and the people, when they heard this, it's almost as though they had been prepared to hear Jesus. And a lot of them grabbed hold of it very quickly, very willingly. And found the same thing with Timothy and his mother and his grandmother. They had been reading the scriptures, and the scriptures, it says, had been preparing them to know the Lord. And when Paul comes through, he talks about this rather new individual, Jesus, the Messiah of Nazareth, and they grabbed hold because their heart's been prepared. And that's what we want to see here, is that when we go talk to people, the law has been weighing on them heavily, like a heat in the night. And they can't sleep at night. They're rolling around, kicking the covers off, because the law is so hot upon them. And when we go to them with Jesus, they grasp hold of it. And then you have areas on the islands like St. Simon's and Jekyll and such. And as Al Baker said, it's sun and fun and friends around here in many ways. And people that have a lot of money. And a friend of mine once said it's hard to tell somebody in $400 shoes that they need Jesus. In many ways, that's true. There also are some mega churches. There's one mega church, it's okay. But, it draws in a lot of people, but there's no real accountability. There's no membership there. But we find those people who want biblical-centered worship. They want to hear the word preached and proclaimed, and without a whole lot of show. They appreciate the means of grace, the word preached, prayer, and the sacraments delivered in the appropriate way. And we're continuing to find people. They're finding us. God is directing people to us, and we continue to grow in that way. So, in that, it's been encouraging, and I'm happy here, and I think we're going in a real good direction.
Good. Well, cool. All right. Thank you. Let's talk about a little evangelism here. So, the evangelism, you talked the other day about how you sort of became, Dr. Barker and so forth, but just take us on a journey here, how you got an interest in evangelism and leading up to the open air preaching.
Yeah, as I said, in the church background in which I grew up, we were kind of anything but fundamentalist. We were a respectable type of church, and in many ways, my grandparents were the silent generation, and in the 20s and such, people had a lot of trouble sharing their faith because of the modernism issues. Scientists were telling everybody that there was no proof for Christianity, and you can hold your beliefs, just don't really go telling everybody about it. And so I think a lot of the people of that generation were a little beaten down. They believed, but people were saying there's no proof for what you believe, and so they were kind of quiet about it. But also, there were times there are respectable churches. We'll call it respectable churches, where everybody goes and they're quiet. They just hear somebody preaching and they leave, and they go back to their respectable jobs. And that's not really what the church is about. Now, I'm not saying you can't have respectable people in the church. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying you can't have people who are wealthy or professionals and those kinds of things. But what I'm saying is that when you go to church, when you're a Christian, your life should revolve around Christ. And that should be your central focus. And so evangelism, we heard stories about people who did evangelism. We heard stories about George Mueller who prayed. We heard all kinds of things, but nobody ever did it themselves. And if they did, they were kind of looked at as like Jesus freaks. So I had this desire to tell of my faith and be of use, but no one to really guide me in it. And secondly, dealing with kind of the ingrained, unspoken sense that you would be a fool if you did it wasn't approved of in some ways, and in some ways that still weighs upon me a little bit. I still have to battle with that sense of approval and have to overcome that. But as I after the event when I was around 24, 25 years old, I began to change in a lot and continue to change in that area and break out and kind of become my own individual, walk, my own way a little more. It was after I'd been married, had a couple of kids. I met Al Baker. We went up to as part of a church up to Connecticut to do a thing, and he had a church plant up there. And then he moved to Birmingham. I got to know him, talked to him and such, and had him over. And he says, I'm gonna put the full court press on you. I want you to go to Uganda with me. You'll go there with
Yeah.
Dr. Krabendam, and you will learn. We'll do evangelism. You'll learn how to do it. There's a school of evangelism. You'll get to do it a lot, and it's a revival culture. You'll really enjoy it. You'll go talk to people, and you'll see people come to faith. It's like going on a good fishing trip. You're going to catch fish. Well, you go to sub-Saharan Africa, you go out and evangelize, you're going to see results. It's the most incredible thing. It's the most incredible thing in the world. I mean, people in the U.S. would be absolutely shocked. I mean, you can drive down the street in a car. You can see two African people walking down a sidewalk in business clothes. You could literally get out of your car, go walk over there and start talking to them about Christ. They would listen, and if they haven't already come to Christ, there's a pretty good chance they would come to Christ right there. Now, you try that in America. You try to go any street in America, see two people walking down the street, get out and start talking to them about Jesus. You're going to have a much different reaction. So it is truly remarkable. So I went there with Dr. Krabendam, and he does the program, teaches you the three problems, three solutions.
Yeah.
Then you go out around the compound there, and you begin by doing face-to-face evangelism with people in the compound. And then we went to a market where there was going to be open air preaching with an acre and all that sort of stuff. And somebody preached, and I had the chance to preach. And there I was, several thousand miles away from home in a totally different culture, and it was still difficult. There was some tourist, some white guy, looked like maybe he was a college.
Jim, I lost you. Can you hear me? Oh, hang on 1 second. We'll see if it'll come back. I'll be right back. Go ahead and text him. Okay, he'll come back on. Cool. All right, there you go. Hang on. There you are. Okay.
I'm sorry, my computer
That's okay.
ran out of juice.
That's okay.
So anyway, where I was saying that where I was in Uganda, and there was a guy who looked like he was like a college professor or something like that, maybe on some sort of research. And he's a white guy, and he's standing there watching us, videoing us with a phone, and I was kind of like, oh man, I don't particularly love this. He thinks we're a bunch of kooks, but I did it. And a girl came up, and she was moved by the preaching, and she wanted to receive Christ as a give herself to the Lord as a result of it. And you know, we did a couple other times of open air preaching while we were there. Then I came back and went out with Al to Alabama football games and preached some, and I was just a lot more comfortable than the last time. I felt a lot more comfortable preaching. I was getting into my own a little bit. I was enjoying it. A sense of passion for why we were there started to really kind of come out. And then when I moved here, we have events like First Friday and other types of events here in Brunswick. And I started exercising that gift here. Also went to the Super Bowl in Houston and preached there. So that's um, and it's really just a matter of whenever I first go out, I still have a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of issues. I am an introvert. I don't like telling people, "Hey, look at me." Hey.
So be back. Hang on. Hang on. Be back in a second. Give it a second. See if it comes back on. If you're listening, Dr. Commandant, that sounds like you want to open air preaching boot camp. Go to Uganda with Dr. Henry Commandant. You know him. 2 weeks with him. That would be a intense time. I'll give it just a couple minutes. Hang on. Give it just a couple minutes and we will maybe sign off here. I wanted him to talk about getting the PCA preachers to preach at the General Assembly this year in Memphis. That's how we kind of got started here. Uh, well, let's see, give it 2 more minutes to 10 till, and then we'll sign off if Jim is not back on by then. Uh, 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 hang on a second. Okay. We'll see. That's a picture of Super Bowl outreach team leaders right there. I'll pop that up. All right. Okay. There you go.
Okay. Now,
Oh, there you go.
sorry.
What's that?
I think that's probably my fault when my computer had plenty of charge when I started, but it's kind of old, and I think it just running the video kind of wore it down. But
That's
anyway,
okay.
we
All
were
right.
talking Dr. Kroppendam, and
Yes, sir.
yes, Dr. K is a blessing, has been a blessing to many people. He is Mr. Uganda. He brought and bringing revival to that area. He has trained I don't know how many evangelists over his years. He's trained my sons in evangelism. Just always on the go. He's probably the closest to meeting the Apostle Paul that you can just about come to. I mean, the guy he is awesome. I trained under him and with Al Baker, and we preached there in Uganda, and then came back and preached here. And I've been continuing to do that. You were mentioning something about the outreach at PCA General Assembly. The PCA was in many ways founded on evangelism. You had D. James Kennedy and Randy Pope and Dr. Barker and others, people who started the Presbyterian Evangelistic Presbyterian Evangelistic Fellowship (PEF). It was back in the early '70s. I mean, they wouldn't talk to you without talking about Christ, and they visited everybody that visited their church. They shared the gospel with them, developed their own evangelism programs. I mean, the PCA became what it was and grew and became the strong denomination it was through a heavy emphasis on evangelism. And in some ways, I think that a lot talk about evangelism and they give lip service to how valuable and how important evangelism is, but they're not really doing it. And we go every year to a medium-sized city and have our General Assembly, and we sit inside and talk about how great the Lord is and talk about evangelism. But there are 3,500 or so pastors, and nobody was going and telling anybody about Jesus. And I said, that's just not right, and we need to have an increased sense of integrity or sense of commitment to the task and the duty of evangelism, not just the duty, but the love of evangelism. And so we're going to look to have an unofficial it's unofficial. It's not put on by the PCA or anything, but it's a group of us who get together to go and do some street preaching and do some face-to-face evangelism. Jonas Brock over at Golden Isles, across the way from where we are, was very instrumental in helping to get that going as well. He's kind of a face-to-face kind of guy and helped to lead that. But in reality, I got all these pastors and ruling elders, and people together, And I sort of thought we might have to kind of put them together with somebody who was experienced and sort of walk them out there and get them back used to doing things. But I mean, they took off like scalded cats. They were up and down Beale Street. You know, I looked this way, and there was somebody conversation with an individual, and it was one of the most fruitful times that I can remember, just from the quality of the conversations that these folks were having with individuals. So it was very fruitful. We're looking for ways to try to continue to do that as we move through between assemblies. We have a little Facebook site called PCA Fools for Christ. That's our site to kind of encourage and hopefully encourage other PCA people to be engaged in evangelism. I'm trying to get some of the cats herded to do more things. I'm maybe not as good a leader and exhorter as you are, but I'm trying to get cats herded a little bit to do some during the off season, because I mean, like the guy said, you know, when you do it, you get fired up about it. Some of them are saying we need to do this more often, and like, yeah, we do. And I wanted to strike while the iron was hot, and the iron got a little bit cold, but I'm going to try to heat it back up again, and get some folks out. Maybe the Georgia Florida football game or something like that.
That's awesome. Well, that was so exciting to imagine a handful of PCA guys out there evangelizing on Beale Street. And did like the word get back to the other 3,500 that, hey, we're out here doing this? Does it have a ripple effect, or is it?
I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, this is our first time, and hopefully next we'll have more. And then we're in Richmond next year, and hopefully we'll have more and more people show up. But I don't. I mean, we did some stories on the Aquila report and things like that, but yeah, we're still a pretty small little outreach.
Well, that's tremendous. I mean, that's phenomenal. I mean,
Don't despise small things, though, right?
right, right. I mean,
Small.
honestly, to have, we can talk about that forever. That's so exciting. So, Lord willing, I was talking to a guy in Canada today. He's basically in a Reformed church, and he goes out and preaches. He lives in London, Ontario. He's a pastor there, and similar kind of story. Got to do it, get out there, this and that. I think the whole thing of evangelizing is tapping into a deeper realm of faith or view of who Christ is and so forth. Your motives have to change a little bit. I'm sure it's hard. You guys have so much pastor burials, weddings and baptisms and just countless things that, really having the emotional time to tap into, all the parts of evangelism. That's a challenge. So we'll keep praying about it. That's exciting. Lord willing, some will come. Well, cool. That's exciting. So one more question, then we'll wrap it up. So you start open air preaching. How did it help or change or anything your pastorate or your pastoral work? Did it support it, augment it? Did you feel more like whole in your work then, like I'm doing the work of the evangelist, or anything of that nature begin to surface when you began to wade into this?
I think that the church has begun to recognize also the value of outreach. I've had a couple of other people in leadership positions start to individually be moved about our need to be evangelizing, particularly in our immediate area. And as I mentioned earlier, it's Section 8 housing. It's people who traditionally don't show up in Presbyterian churches, and many of them are not in any church at all, have been highly secularized. But we still, feel of call this particular community. We're not exactly sure what it looks like, the nuts and bolts of how it operates. Do you go and, obviously we want to tell them about Christ. Does it look like, going after evening worship on Sunday and doing a worship in, one of the housing project areas and getting a tent or getting some, little speakers and a guitar and going and singing some songs and then having a brief word of scripture, or does it look like talking with people, sharing with them, counseling with them, trying to get them together for a Bible study and in one of the houses there in the area, and live in that community who can can be reaching out within their own community and training people in God's word, calling them together, and having sort of their own church in their own community. I'm fine. They don't have to come to my church. I'm fine with with whatever. But we do feel like we need to minister to a population. We may go in there in a lot of areas and find that they've been replaced with Mexicans and South Americans, people who have come across and are working here in our areas. But rapidly, we're starting to see a lot of Hispanic people, and we may go and find that, which would be another direction. What do you do? We speak Spanish, and then where do you direct them? Do you send them to a Spanish church? Do you try to bring them in? Do they even speak the language? What do you do? So we're praying about it a lot. We would certainly covet the prayers of people, because we don't want to go out and just do something. We want God to really direct us and lead us, and for whatever we do, to have some benefit. We don't want to go out on our own, so to speak. So yeah, we'd ask that people would pray that God would speak to us and show us how it is He would have us to serve to this community with the gospel.
Awesome. All right, Jim. Any last thoughts you got?
I would encourage people, if you not been a part of open air preaching and evangelism, to do it. It is a blast. I don't think you necessarily have to be called to be a preacher to do it. You can look. All it is going and telling the old story. I love to tell the story. Those who hear it know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. It's the same story that strokes the harp in your own heart. Go out and tell people that. Or you can tell them the 4 spiritual laws. You can tell them Dr. Krabendaum's 3 problems, 3 solutions. You can give an EE workout sermon using one of the parables. But go and try it. It is much easier than you think. If you have to close your eyes, I close my eyes all the time. It's all right. Just go and say what needs to be said. We have opportunities to go to the Super Bowl. It's a great event. You'll get good training. People will sit there and encourage you with a lot of prayer and training on how to do it. It's a wonderful way to get started. You're away from home. You're away from people You're there in an intensive prayer environment. You're with a lot of other people. Other people will show you how to do it. They'll go before you. Go first. You don't have to go first. And you're not preaching for several hours. You're there, but there are other people. It's a great. If you haven't been to a Super Bowl, it is the premier event. It's the premier sporting event, one of the premier cultural events in America, and it's a wonderful opportunity to preach the gospel. And pray for Las Vegas. Pray for the people who be coming to Las Vegas. Pray for the people who work and live in Las Vegas, that they too will be under the white hot heat of the law, and it will be weighing upon them. That when we go and we preach there, we find people saying, "Brothers, what must we do to be saved?"
Amen. Amen. All right, Jim. What a treat. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah.
We look forward to praying, keeping in touch all this fall, and then being in Las Vegas back in February. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. I enjoyed it too.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
See you soon.
All right, great story. Great story. Lots of depth there that you could tap into, and Jim's own conversion, his journey to the calling and seminary and churches and so forth. And then really the last point about how the evangelism really has benefited the church. Some of the leadership coming awakened about this. You hear these stories that there seems to be a pattern where, one guy starts it and people start paying attention and things start happening. It definitely shifts sort of the schedule of people and the way what's going on around them. That seems to be very important in this process. And so that's one reason why we want to encourage evangelism, get out there and keep pushing. So friends, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. We will talk to you soon. Have a good day.